Hey, what's up guys, and welcome back to IGCSE Success, your one-stop shop for everything IGCSE English. Now in today's video, which is video 5 out of our 10 skills-based lessons, looking specifically at the skills that you need to really elevate your creative prose writing for paper 2, we're going to be looking at the show don't tell method. Now this technique is all about providing your readers with opportunities to really experience things rather than just telling them. So grab your pen, your notebook, your brain, because this video is really going to help you elevate your creative prose. And with all that said and done, let's go. Okay guys, writing to describe the show don't tell method. Let's get started. Okay, so I've put here the show don't tell method is one of the golden rules of descriptive writing. It really brings writing to life by using vivid details and actions instead of direct statements, making scenes more immersive and engaging. Often when I'm marking the descriptive essays or pieces that my students produce, I might circle sentences and I might say something along the lines of, this is a telling sentence, this is a showing sentence, okay? Turn this telling sentence into a showing sentence. You get the drift. Right, before we begin the lesson, let's just break it down further. So it really is a fundamental technique in descriptive prose, descriptive writing, and it encourages you, I guess, to use descriptive language, actions, sensory details, instead of, I guess, stating the obvious. When you tell, you are giving the reader a fact, such as she was scared, she was sad, she was angry, etc., etc. And we're going to see some of those rather basic sentences in this short lesson. However, when you show the reader, you I guess in many ways paint a picture with your words, and instead of just saying she was scared, you might describe her I guess actions, her body language, or even how the environment, the setting that she's in reflects her fear. Let me give you a brief example. Her hands trembled and she glanced over her shoulder. Her heart was pounding as the shadows crept closer. This method really draws the reader into the experience. It's more engaging, and it honestly does, guys, create a stronger emotional impact. You are, I guess, in many ways guiding the reader to feel what the character feels, if that makes sense, to see what they see and hear what they hear, which I guess ultimately makes your writing much more vivid and memorable and immersive, etc., etc. It's like you're putting them right there in the moment with your characters, and that's what successful descriptive prose needs to try and achieve throughout the whole piece. And I guess the key is to use your 5 senses, as well as obviously the vocabulary, the stylistic choices, sentence structure, etc. Everything in your writer's toolbox. The 5 senses are really fundamental. So sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell. And these will really help you to create a rich, and as I said before, immersive scene that's way, way, way more interesting than just stating things. So again, instead of saying the room was messy, show the mess. You could say the clothes were piled on the floor and a half-eaten sandwich sat on the table, its bread soggy, covered in crumbs, okay? By showing, you really do let the reader sort of fill in the gaps in many ways, making them feel more involved in the story. So next time you write, after watching this lesson, guys, I challenge you, I implore you to swap out your telling sentences with showing descriptions, and I promise you it will add so much depth to your writing and make your characters and settings feel authentic, feel real. And I just put here in the notes at the bottom, and I've alluded to it already, but ultimately it does come down to your vocabulary as well. So this really does shape the depth and the impact of your writing. Your showing descriptive paragraphs are not going to be successful if you are not acutely aware of the vocabulary choices that you are using and why you are using them. Now, let's take a look at 5 rather bland and boring, quote unquote, telling sentences, and let's see how I've transform them into far more vivid, quote unquote, showing ones. And I'll walk you through each one and demonstrate how, with a few adjustments, we can make these sentences come alive by engaging the reader's senses and emotions. Okay, so on your screens now, you've got a very boring telling sentence. Robbie was sad. That is not in any way immersive or engaging for the reader. So how can we transform that very straightforward, rather bland, depressing sentence into a far more immersive one? Well, let's take a look. Robbie slumped over his desk, his shoulders heavy, eyes glassy. A shaky breath escaped as silent tears splashed onto his exam paper, the ink blurring beneath them. Now, this is a really great example of how to show emotion rather than just tell it. So instead of just saying Robbie was sad, I've used descriptive language and I've used physical actions to convey his emotional state more vividly. So let's just unpick this in a bit more detail. So first of all, the phrase Robbie slumped over his desk, his shoulders heavy. These two images give a really strong visual of Robbie's defeat and I guess his utter exhaustion. And that word slumped, my diction there, that verb slumped shows that he's physically drained. And that phrase or that image of him having heavy shoulders adds weight to his, I guess, emotional burden. It's a very subtle but clear indicator of sadness. And what I said before, good descriptive writing, it should allow readers to fill in the gaps themselves. Next, I've used that phrase, eyes glassy. So of course this tells us that Robbie is either on the verge of tears or has been crying. It's not stated directly, but of course it implies emotional distress without needing the word sad. The reader, of course, can fill in the blanks or can infer what's happening just from this brief detail. I've also used that phrase, a shaky breath escapes. This adds another layer of emotion, guys. So a shaky breath is something we can all recognize as a sign of struggling to, I guess, to hold back tears or anxiety. And it really shows Robbie's emotions are so intense that even his breath is affected. And finally, that image of his silent tears splashing onto his exam paper, the ink blurring beneath them, really, I guess, brings his sadness home. Tears on the paper represents, I guess, loss of control and how Robbie's emotions are overwhelming him to the point where it's I guess, physically impacting his work. And the blurring ink gives us a strong image of how his emotional state is interfering with his ability to concentrate, further deepening the sense of sadness which just permeates the whole sentence. Everything works together, I guess, to show Robbie's sadness in a way that really pulls the reader in and makes them feel, I guess, the emotion along with him rather than just telling them how he feels. It's all about letting the reader experience the emotion through the vivid details, the actions, the diction, etc. Now, our second rather bland and boring sentence is, it was raining. Okay, how could we improve this? Well, let's take a look. Dark clouds split open, unleashing a torrential downpour, relentless and unyielding. Now, this image is particularly successful because it works to, I guess, convey a sense of intensity and emotional weight, even though it's describing the weather. So let's just unpick that first image of the dark cloud splitting open. We've got that verb split, and here it isn't just a typical description of clouds. It adds drama and suggests, I guess, in many ways, a violent or forceful separation, which really does set the tone for the rest of the sentence. The clouds aren't, I guess, merely there. They are actively tearing apart, and in many ways applying something tumultuous or overwhelming is about to happen. Next, I've used that phrase, unleashing a torrential downpour. So obviously lots of powerful vocabulary choices in that image there, and this image very much amplifies this sort of sense of chaos. We've got that verb unleashing, and this gives a sense that the rain isn't just falling, it's being released in this wild, chaotic, uncontrolled way. And that word torrential, that adjective torrential, heightens this by emphasizing the, I guess, severity of the rain, making it feel more dangerous and unstoppable. And this makes the weather feel almost as if it's reflecting something intense, like an emotional storm or crisis. And that last image, just after the colon, I've used two adjectives, so relentless and unyielding, and these work together perfectly as a follow-up. And these adjectives show that the rain is unrelenting, refusing to stop or let up, and it very much mirrors the previous action of unleashing, and I guess ties the idea together, ensuring that we feel the full power of the downpour. The rain isn't just falling, it's overwhelming and leaving absolutely no room for escape or relief. Now with this sentence, hopefully you can see how I've taken a simple concept, in this case the rain, and I've managed to show its intensity through action and choice of words, so by diction. The imagery here makes the downpour feel like some sort of unstoppable force, and this can be used to parallel an emotional storm or a moment of high tension in a story or piece of descriptive prose. And the vivid descriptions really pull the reader in and give them a sense of, I guess, raw, unyielding power of the weather. Now sentence number 3, the house looked uninviting. Guys, I don't need to tell you how boring that sentence is. Okay, the adjective uninviting is kind of cool, but it's a telling sentence. How can we improve it? Well, let's take a look. The decrepit house teetered on the moss-covered hill, its cracked windows staring out like hollow eyes, the paint peeling in ragged strips. Love the sounds that are used in that sentence. Now, all of the techniques I've used, all of my senses, the vocabulary, etc., give the house a life of its own and conveys this sense of decay and neglect. And I guess that's the overall effect. Now let's unpick it a little bit. So I started with that image of the house being decrepit and teetering on the moss-covered hill. So we've got that adjective decrepit, which immediately, I guess, sets a tone of age and decay and very much suggests the house is falling apart. That verb teetered adds an element of instability, as though the house is on the verge of collapse, I guess. And this further emphasizes its fragility. Now, the moss-covered hill paints a picture of the house being old and forgotten, as moss, I think, typically grows on things that have been left undisturbed for a long time. So again, this creates a sense of abandonment. Now, the next image I've used is its cracked window staring out like hollow eyes. So it's a haunting simile that turns the house into something almost human. Now, through me describing the windows as hollow eyes, we are given a visual that suggests the house is lifeless and vacant, and it also evokes the image of a derelict, lifeless being, giving this really eerie, almost sinister presence. Now, that final image of the paint peeling in ragged strips, I love that adjective. I like the G's in that adjective, ragged. It just sounds very unpleasant to say. This image adds another layer of visual decay. We've got that, as I said before, we've got that adjective ragged, suggesting not only the physical peeling of the paint, but also an emotional state, I guess. Something neglected, torn and worn out. And this detail further supports the house's image of abandonment and neglect, and the peeling paint very much symbolizes the passage of time in many ways, erosion and the lack of care. Now, everything I've used worked together to show that the house is more than just a structure. I've tried to make it become almost like a character in a story. Through the descriptive language, we can feel its age, its isolation, and its deterioration. And the imagery gives the house I guess, personality and emotional weight. And these really help immerse the reader in a setting that's both, well, unsettling and full of atmosphere. Now, our next sentence is: the classroom was chaotic. Another boring telling sentence, guys. But how could we improve it? Well, let's take a look. The classroom buzzed with chaos as students darted between desks, pencils soaring through the air and papers scattering across the floor in disarray. Gosh, sounds like my years when I was training to be a teacher. So what makes this sentence particularly successful? How does this sentence really show this sort of palpable sense of chaos and energy? Well, of course, through the vivid imagery and action and the diction and everything. So let's unpick it. So I've started with that image of the classroom buzzing with chaos. I've decided to use that verb buzzed, which immediately gives an auditory image of noise and I guess confusion, as if the classroom is alive with activity. Now the word chaos sets the tone for the scene, okay, and it very much suggests an environment full of disorder and unpredictability, and it's a strong and dynamic opening that I guess primes the reader for the chaotic energy to come. Now the second image that I've used describes the students darting between desks, and this shows motion and very much implies that the students are moving quickly, of course, and with purpose, but perhaps in a frantic or organized or maybe even dangerous way. Now that verb darted creates an image of sudden sharp movement, effectively adding to this sense of disorder and urgency in the classroom. Now another effective image I've used are the pencils soaring through the air, very much heightening the sense of wild action. It's always like these students are out of control, they've been released from their cages. Now I've used that verb soaring, and I've used it to very much suggest that pencils, of course, are being thrown or flying through the air. And I've used this to add an element of unpredictability and I guess fun to the chaos, but some might argue it's somewhat dangerous. And this small detail shows just out of control the situation is. And the last image that I've used are the papers scattered across the floor in disarray. So I've used this image to give the reader a clear visual of the aftermath of the chaos. Papers are being tossed about, creating a mess on the floor. We've got that word disarray, very much showing that the scene isn't just messy, it's completely disorganized, which very much emphasizes the level of chaos. Now again, I've used lots of different techniques to show the action, the energy, the disorder through specific details, and we can really visualize the scene. We can hear the buzzing of noise, we can feel the frantic movements, and this approach, again, as I've said many times before, it really pulls the reader into the scene, making the chaos come to life in a way that is far more engaging than lots of telling sentences, guys. Now our last very lackluster telling sentence is Sarah was angry. Let's see how we can improve this one. Sarah's face flushed red, her fists clenched so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She stomped her foot, her eyes burning with frustration. So another great example of showing how a person's emotion can be conveyed through diction, through description, through action, etc. And Sarah's frustration and anger is really palpable. So let's unpick it a little bit. So I've started with that image of Sarah's face flushing red. So as readers, we immediately see the, I guess, physical manifestation of her emotional state. The redness of her face is a clear indicator that she's experiencing strong emotions, likely anger or embarrassment, and it's something we can easily visualize. It's a subtle way of showing her frustration without directly saying Sarah was angry, and that's what we want to try and avoid. The next image that I've used is her fist clenched so tightly that her knuckles turned white. And this very much builds on this tension. We've got the image of the clenched fist, very much showing her attempt to control or maybe even contain her emotions. But the detail of her knuckles turning white reveals just how intense the feeling is. This small but powerful image shows that her anger, or I guess her frustration, is so strong it's physically affecting her body. And the fact that she stomps her foot adds a sense of action to her frustration. Now, the act of stomping, of course, is a physical outburst that conveys impatience, irritation, or maybe even anger in this case, and it's a clear visual sign of someone who is no longer able to contain their emotions and is expressing them through movement. Now, finally, the last image that I've used is of Sarah's eyes burning with frustration, very much giving us a vivid image of Sarah's emotional intensity. Now, that verb burning is especially effective because it very much suggests an overwhelming, searing emotion, showing us how her frustration, I guess, is consuming her. It's all consuming, and it gives us an insight into how deep and powerful her feelings are in this moment. So again, all of the techniques I've used, they all work together. They all play a role in showing Sarah's frustration, her anger. It allows us to feel her negative emotions through the physical details and actions, and by showing how her body reacts to her emotions, her flushed face, clenched fist, stomping of the feet, burning eyes, etc., the reader is able to experience the intensity of her feelings alongside her. I'm going to demonstrate how we can describe a picture using the show don't tell method. So instead of simply stating what's in the picture, I'll focus on using detailed descriptions and sensory language to really bring the scene to life. This way you'll be able to create a more vivid image in the reader's mind, allowing them to experience the moment rather than just be told about it. The dust-laden curtains hung in tatters, once vibrant, now faded, doing little to filter the harsh shards of sunlight that sliced through the gaps. A forlorn sofa sat silently, flanked by an armchair on one side. The other mirrored it from the opposite end, both equally draped in melancholy. The coffee table, bare and untouched, was swathed in a thick layer of dust, abandoned and forgotten. In the corner, a solitary lamp stood on a small, worn table, its bulb long extinguished. Wilted plants drooped on the windowsill, their leaves brittle and brown, ensnared in a web of cobwebs that clung to the corners, thick with years of neglect. And that's all for today, guys. As always, leave your comments and feedback below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And I will be back very soon with part 6 of my 10 skills-based series. Until next time, bye-bye.